Let's just spend a couple of minutes on talking about why the US economy has been so strong.
Okay, yeah.
There are several really interesting things going on. Perhaps the most important one is we got this massive amount of stimulus. We've talked about that before
Yeah.
during COVID. The government, the Fed created something like $5 trillion, and the government probably $7 trillion of injections of stimulus money during that time. This was an enormous amount of stimulus,
Sure.
almost like we were fighting a war. When the government fights a war, they have a tremendous amount of spending and stimulus, and that creates an economic boom. During World War II, the government spent so much money, it brought the Great Depression to an end. And then after World War, the government debt went up above 100% of GDP, but that government spending created an economic boom that lasted for 2 decades. So while the spending hasn't been quite on that level, still we're probably seeing the echo boom from that COVID stimulus still going on. In other words, when they sent out stimulus checks, that people got those checks and they deposited them into
Yep.
their bank account. That resulted in total bank deposits belonging to people like you and me. Total bank deposits jumped by 35% over 2 years.
Yep.
Nothing like that had ever happened before. And those deposits are still in the economy. They're only slowly being removed by quantitative tightening. So that's one thing. Another thing that's related to that is we've had an explosion of wealth in the US. Over the last 4 years, since the end of 2019, the total wealth of the Americans has jumped by almost $40 trillion, $39 trillion. So that was up from say 110, it's actually 156 now. So this was like a 40% jump in wealth in 4 years.
And what do we attribute that
$39
to?
trillion of new wealth. Well, part of it was the interest rates were zero for
Sure.
a very long time. The other part of it was a lot of quantitative easing for a very long time. And then most recently, the AI boom. Everyone became extremely excited about the Magnificent Seven and created a new round of asset prices inflation there. So $39 trillion in 4 years, to put that into perspective, the entire US government debt is only $34 trillion. So there's been enough wealth created in 4 years to finance the entire US government debt. So this wealth creation that has occurred, people say it's just paper wealth or artificial wealth. Well, I can assure you, you can spend that money and buy yachts with it or whatever.
Right,
If
right.
you're a tech billionaire, that's real money. And it's stimulating consumption and it's stimulating economic growth. And then we still have big budget deficits. The stimulus has really continued even after the COVID period is over. Last year, the budget deficit was, I think, $1.6 trillion. This year is going to be 1.5, and it's going to stay at that level for the next several years, according to the Congressional Budget Office. Now, part of this is related to the big economic bills that were passed by the previous Congress, the Infrastructure Act, the CHIPS and Science Act, and the Inflation Reduction Act. That money is now beginning to pour into the economy and resulting in a lot of spending occurring now. And that spending is going to continue to occur over the next many years on a very large scale. So that's creating growth. Then there's immigration on a very large scale. We know that people are coming across the borders in record numbers. I'm by no means an expert on this, but I did look into this last night. And one paper I was reading suggested that there have been 9 million people who have crossed the border over the last, say, 3.5 years. And that paper suggested that 70% of those people are allowed to stay in the country. So that's something like 6 million additional people in 3.5 years. That added about 2% to the US population. So with a 2% population boost to the country leads to more economic growth. Those people are earning money and spending money.
Yeah.
And that's stimulating the economy. Those are just, some of the big factors that are driving this very strong economy.